Welcome back to Saving History. In our last episode, we explored that incredible story of Château Gaillard,
Oh, yeah.
Richard the Lionheart's castle,
Mm-hmm.
supposedly impenetrable,
Right,
but of course it eventually falls.
right.
So today we're going to kind of deep dive into the details, really look at, what made it so special and how it was finally conquered.
Yeah, I think what makes Château Gaillard so fascinating is that it really represents like this turning point in military history. And it wasn't just a castle, right?
Yeah.
It was a symbol of Richard's power and a testament to, the advanced military engineering of the time.
Yeah, one of the things that struck me right away
Mm-hmm.
was just how personally obsessed Richard was with this whole project.
Yeah.
This wasn't some distant king giving orders.
Yeah.
He was so hands-on, involved in the design and the construction.
Absolutely.
What do you think drove him to pour so much of himself into this castle?
Well, you have to consider the political climate of 12th century Europe. It was chaotic.
Yeah.
Kings were constantly like vying for power and territory. And Richard, he was fresh off the Crusades, determined to secure his hold on Normandy,
Right.
which was constantly under threat from Philip II of France.
Sure.
And Château Gaillard, strategically positioned on this cliff overlooking the Seine River. It was almost like his way of saying, Normandy is mine.
Yeah.
I'm here to stay.
Yeah, it does feel like a statement, not just a fortress,
Exactly.
but a symbol.
Yeah, and the speed at which it was built.
Oh, yeah.
2 years.
Unheard of.
I mean, that's astonishing even for modern construction,
I know.
let alone the 12th century.
Yeah,
It really speaks volumes about Richard's ambition and the skill of his builder.
absolutely. And it wasn't just speed. It was like he incorporated all this cutting-edge military technology. It was
Right.
like a medieval super fortress.
This is where we see this concept of concatenated defense come into play.
Yep.
So the castle, it wasn't just one single wall. It was a series of defensive layers, each designed to slow down and weaken the enemy. You have the outer bailey, the middle bailey, and finally the inner bailey with the keep at its heart.
Wow.
It's like a series of concentric circles, each more fortified than the last.
So not just thick walls, but making the enemy fight for every inch.
Precisely wear them down before they even reach the heart of the castle.
Yeah.
And each layer had its own unique features.
Right?
The outer bailey was designed to absorb the initial shock of an attack.
Okay.
Then you had the middle bailey, where defenders could use flanking fire to further disrupt the enemy. And finally, the inner bailey, with its towering keep, was the ultimate fallback position.
Yeah, I remember reading about that keep and how it's like shaped like a flower.
Oh, yeah.
Was that purely aesthetics or was there a strategic purpose behind that?
No, that unique shape was incredibly functional.
Okay.
It eliminated any blind spots, allowing defenders to see and fire upon attackers from every angle.
Oh, wow.
Richard really understood visibility was key to a successful defense.
And those curved walls. They weren't just for show either.
No, not at all.
I remember reading that they were specifically designed to deflect projectiles.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Richard, having spent years fighting in the Crusades,
Right.
he had probably seen similar designs in the East and understood their effectiveness.
Okay.
So a flat wall offers a direct target, right?
Yeah.
But a curved surface causes projectiles to glint off, minimizing the impact.
Wow.
It was brilliant, applying physics to military engineering.
So using like cutting edge science to protect his castle?
He was ahead of his time.
He was way ahead of his time, but also kind of a showman, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that story about Philip II mocking the castle.
You mean when he asked if Richard's saucy castle was finished?
Yes, and Richard, classic Richard. I would hold it even if its walls were made of butter.
There you go.
He was so confident in his creation.
Yeah, it's a classic Richard moment, right?
Yeah,
This
yeah.
mix of arrogance and genuine belief in his fortress. But as history would prove, even the most meticulously crafted defenses can be overcome with enough ingenuity and determination.
And that leads us to the siege itself.
Okay.
I'm so eager to unpack how Philip II, facing such formidable defenses, managed to conquer Château Gaillard. What were his initial moves?
Well, Philip knew a direct assault would be costly and likely futile.
Yeah.
So he opted for a more strategic approach, beginning with a siege in 1203.
Siege meaning he surrounded the castle, cut off supplies, hoping to starve them out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Classic strategy.
Right.
And it put immense pressure on Roger de Lacy, the constable in charge of defending Château Gaillard.
Right.
De Lacy desperately needed reinforcements. But unfortunately for him, King John Richard's successor, he was facing his own problems back in England.
So de Lacy's on his own.
Pretty much.
Facing the full might of the French army with limited resources.
Talk about a stressful situation.
I know.
It was, and Philip, sensing de Lacy's vulnerability,
Yeah.
he decided to test the strength of those famed defenses.
Okay.
In October of 1203, he launched his first major assault, bombarding the castle with massive rocks hurled from catapults.
I'm picturing these huge stones, some weighing over 200 pounds, just smashing against the walls. The sound must have been terrifying
Oh, absolutely.
for those inside.
It was a psychological tactic as much as a physical one.
Right.
Philip was trying to shake their morale,
Sure.
make them question the invincibility of their fortress.
But the curved walls did exactly what Richard intended.
They did.
Right. They deflected the projectiles, minimizing the damage.
Precisely. The stones glanced off the curved surfaces, losing much of their force.
Yeah.
Richard's design was proving its worth.
Wow.
A victory for innovative engineering and a major setback for Philip.
But de Lacy's men weren't just passively enduring this bombardment.
No, they weren't.
Right.
They fought back fiercely.
Okay.
They used artillery, poured boiling oil from the ramparts, unleashed volleys of crossbow bolts.
Wow.
It was brutal back and forth.
So this first phase of the siege is essentially a stalemate.
Yeah.
Philip can't break through.
Right.
De Lacy's trapped inside with dwindling resources. What happens next?
Well, realizing that a direct assault wasn't working,
Okay.
Philip decided to change tactics.
Okay.
He understood that adaptability was key to success in warfare, and he wasn't afraid to try something new.
Interesting. What did he do?
He made a decision that at first glance seemed completely counterintuitive.
Okay.
He began filling in the dry moat surrounding the outer bailey.
Wait. The moat.
Yeah,
But moats are supposed to keep attackers out.
I know.
Why would he do that?
It seems strange, but Philip had a clever plan in mind.
Okay.
He was transforming that defensive obstacle into a pathway.
So you're saying he was using the moat to get closer to the castle?
Exactly. By filling it in, he was creating a ramp that would allow his siege engines to get closer to the walls.
Okay.
Plus, his troops could approach more easily, making a potential ground assault less hazardous. It was a risky gamble, but it showed Philip's strategic thinking. Yeah, it was risky, no doubt about it, exposing his troops like that, giving the defenders a clear shot. But Philip was confident in his engineers and the discipline of his army. And as winter set in, his gamble started to pay off.
Wait, winter? They continued the siege through the winter.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty unusual, isn't it?
Yeah.
I thought medieval armies usually packed up and waited for warmer weather.
You're right, that was the norm. Sieges were often seasonal affairs.
Right.
But Philip was determined to break Château Gaillard.
Wow.
He had shelters built for his troops and equipment, stockpiled supplies. He essentially turned his camp into a winter fortress.
So instead of giving the defenders a break, he used the winter to wear them down even further.
Exactly.
Wow, that's some serious commitment.
Yeah.
I guess Philip really wanted that castle, but filling in the moat doesn't mean getting inside.
Right.
Those walls are still incredibly strong.
True. But that moat gave Philip sappers the cover they needed to get close enough to undermine the outer bailey wall. By November, they'd created a breach.
A breach. So they were in... I bet that was a huge morale boost for Philip's army and a blow to the defenders.
It was a significant victory, but de Lacy was a skilled commander.
Okay.
He'd anticipated this and had already built a second barricade behind the breached wall.
Oh, wow.
It bought him some time,
Okay.
but the situation was getting more and more desperate.
Trapped inside facing a determined enemy who's willing to brave the winter.
Yeah.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It was.
What happened next? Did Philip just keep hammering away at those walls?
He could have, but that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
One of Philip's men noticed something unusual on the cliff face below the castle.
Okay.
A small postern gate.
Postern gate, like a secret back entrance.
Exactly. It was designed for a path leading down to the river.
Okay.
So small and high up that the defenders considered it insignificant.
So Richard, with all his focus on defense, overlooked this one tiny detail.
It seems that way he concentrated on the obvious approaches, never imagining someone would attempt such a daring climb.
Right.
But Philip, ever the opportunist, saw his chance.
I have to admit, I'm impressed. This is starting to feel like a heist movie.
Yeah.
How did they even get through that gate?
On a freezing February night, a small group of French soldiers, led by a knight named Ralph of Esnevel, scaled the cliff using ropes and grappling hooks.
Wow.
They had the element of surprise on their side.
Yeah.
The defenders never expected an attack from that direction.
Scaling a sheer cliff in the dead of winter.
I know.
Those soldiers must have been incredibly brave, or maybe a little crazy.
A bit of both, perhaps, and the frozen ground, which you'd think would make the climb harder, actually worked in their favor.
Oh, really?
It gave them better handholds than the usual loose chalk.
Oh, wow.
They reached the postern gate, the chapel above it lightly defended, and breached the outer wall.
That is incredible. A handful of soldiers sneaking up a cliff in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
I guess sometimes the most unexpected moves are the most effective.
Absolutely. Philip recognized that adaptability and a willingness to exploit even the smallest weakness could be more powerful than brute force.
Right?
And once they were inside, they fought with everything they had. There was no going back for them.
So that one small oversight, that tiny postern gate, changed the entire course of the siege.
It was a turning point. Philip sent reinforcements, and soon that daring raid turned into a full-blown breach of the outer bailey.
Wow.
The defenders, demoralized and outnumbered, were pushed back.
This Philip guy is starting to sound pretty impressive. He's clearly not just a brute force kind of leader.
Exactly. He was a master strategist, constantly analyzing the situation and adjusting his tactics.
Yeah.
And with the outer bailey under his control, he set his sights on the middle bailey, bringing out the big guns, so to speak.
Big guns, we're not timing cannons yet, are we?
Not quite, but he used a tactic that was just as devastating: mining.
Mining, like digging tunnels under the walls.
Precisely. It was a dangerous and time-consuming process, but incredibly effective. Philip's engineers dug these elaborate tunnels, shoring them up with timbers,
Wow.
hoping to reach the foundations of the middle bailey wall.
I'm trying to picture this tunnels, counter-tunnels explosions. This
Yeah.
is some serious medieval engineering.
It was a battle fought beneath the earth, a test of skill and nerve.
Yeah.
De Lacy's men tried to countermine digging their own tunnels to intercept the French.
Right.
But the very thing that made Château Gaillard so strong, its solid limestone foundation, made countermining from inside incredibly difficult.
So Richard's obsession with impregnability actually worked against the defenders in this case.
Ironically, yes, they were fighting blind, unable to pinpoint the location of the French tunnels. It was a losing battle.
So how did Philip's miners finally break through those massive walls? Did they just keep digging until they reached the other side?
It was a bit more sophisticated than that.
Okay.
They used a technique that combined engineering and, believe it or not, a bit of chemistry.
Chemistry, now I'm really intrigued.
They dug tunnels beneath a section of wall, propping it up with wooden beams wrapped in wet animal hides.
Yeah.
As the hides dried, they contracted, pulling away from the stone.
Creating a controlled collapse genius.
Exactly. It was a delayed demolition using simple materials and principles of physics to devastating effect.
Wow.
When the supports gave way, a section of the middle bailey wall came crashing down.
I bet that was a sight to behold, a culmination of weeks of work, a sudden dramatic collapse. What a way to break through those seemingly impenetrable defenses.
It was a turning point in the siege.
Yeah.
Philip's troops poured through the breach, ready to finally take the castle. But De Lacy's men weren't giving up just yet.
Okay.
They fought back with incredible ferocity, using crossbow stones, even pouring molten lead from the rooftops.
While molten lead talk about desperate measures, they must have known they were fighting a losing battle.
They were, but they were determined to make the French pay for every inch of ground. And in the midst of this chaotic battle, Philip unleashed a terrifying new weapon, Greek fire.
Greek fire, isn't that the stuff that burns on water?
The very same. It was a liquid fire that was incredibly difficult to extinguish.
Yeah.
And this was one of its first appearances in Western Europe.
Wow.
Imagine facing this unstoppable fire, clinging to everything it touched, spreading panic and destruction.
It sounds terrifying. I can only imagine the psychological impact it must have had on the defenders.
It was a devastating weapon, both physically and psychologically. But even facing these overwhelming odds, De Lacy and his remaining men refused to surrender. They retreated to the inner keep, Richard's final stronghold, hoping for a miracle.
The inner keep, the heart of Château Gaillard, designed to be the ultimate last stand. It sounds like the stage is set for a final showdown. What happened next?
Well, what happened next is both surprising and, in hindsight, somewhat comical. Château Gaillard, for all its sophisticated defenses, had one very mundane flaw: its latrine chutes.
Latrine chutes. You mean the toilets? You're telling me that the castle that Richard the Lionheart designed to be impregnable was brought down by toilets?
It sounds absurd, I know, but it's true. These chutes, vertical shafts built into the walls for waste disposal, were never considered a threat.
Okay.
But a group of French soldiers, led by a man named Peter of Bourges, saw an opportunity.
They climbed the latrine chutes.
They did. Using ropes and whatever tools they could find, they endured unimaginable conditions, the stench, the cramped space.
I can't even imagine.
And ascended those chutes. Imagine the surprise of the defenders when French soldiers suddenly emerged from the toilets.
That's incredible. Talk about an unconventional attack. It sounds like something out of a Monty Python skit.
Bet.
I guess all's fair in love and war, right?
Indeed, and it proves that even the most meticulously designed defenses can have unexpected weaknesses.
So that was it, the great Château Gaillard brought down by a daring climb through the sewers. It's not exactly the epic ending I was expecting.
It's certainly not glorious, but it highlights a crucial lesson. Even the strongest fortress is only as strong as its weakest link, and sometimes the greatest victories come from the most unexpected places.
Well, I have to admit, I never thought I'd be so captivated by the story of a medieval toilet. This entire siege has been full of surprises.
And we're not done yet. There's still more to discuss about the aftermath of the siege and its impact on castle design and warfare.
I'm all ears. This has been one incredible deep dive. Okay, so Château Gaillard falls not in a blaze of glory, but through a sewer. What happened next? Did de Lacy and his men just surrender?
Well, de Lacy, realizing further resistance was futile, he negotiated a surrender with Phillip, securing favorable terms for his men.
Okay.
He was allowed to march out with his remaining troops, weapons, even some supplies.
I guess that's a small victory in the face of defeat.
Right.
She held out for months against a superior force.
Yeah, he did.
But what about the castle itself? Did Philip just destroy it?
Surprisingly, no. He recognized Château Gaillard's strategic importance.
Okay.
And incorporated it into his own defenses.
Wow.
It remained a significant stronghold for centuries.
Really?
Even undergoing renovations and expansions.
So even in defeat, Richard's castle proved its worth.
You could say that.
But you mentioned the siege had a lasting impact on castle design and warfare.
Oh, absolutely.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, Château Gaillard's fall was a wake-up call for castle builders across Europe. It highlighted the importance of defending every single point of a fortress, no matter how seemingly insignificant.
I guess Richard's oversight with the postern gate really drove that point home.
It did. From then on, castle designs incorporated features like thicker walls to counter mining,
Right.
more elaborate latrine systems, ones that couldn't be easily scaled,
Yeah.
and a shift towards networks of castles rather than relying on a single isolated stronghold.
So it became less about building an impenetrable superfortress and more about creating layers of defense, multiple points of resistance.
Precisely. Château Gaillard's fall marked a turning point in military thinking. It demonstrated that brute force alone wasn't enough.
Right.
Adaptability, cunning, and a willingness to exploit any weakness, even a toilet chute, were now essential elements of warfare.
It's amazing how one event, one siege, could have such a ripple effect across history.
It shows how even in defeat there are lessons to be learned. Richard, despite all his efforts, couldn't account for every possibility.
Yeah.
Philip, on the other hand, proved that a keen eye for detail, a willingness to adapt, and a bit of audacity could overcome even the most formidable defenses.
This whole story has really challenged my preconceived notions about medieval warfare.
Yeah.
It's not just about knights and swords. It's about engineering strategy and sometimes just plain luck.
And human ingenuity, both in creating seemingly invincible defenses and finding creative ways to overcome them.
I'm definitely going to look at castles and maybe even toilets a little differently from now on.
I think we all will. Château Gaillard is a reminder that nothing is truly impenetrable and that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most unexpected places.
This has been a truly incredible deep dive.
It has.
I'm still amazed by how much we unpacked from just one episode of the podcast.
Yeah, it's a testament to the power of history. There are always new discoveries to be made, new perspectives to consider, and I think that's what makes it so fascinating.
Absolutely. And on that note, I want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us on this journey through the siege of Château Gaillard.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everyone.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, be sure to subscribe to Saving History on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube for more captivating stories from the past.
We've got plenty more to come.
Thank you for listening to the Saving History podcast.